welcome to the MisesUK.org podcast, sponsored by finlingo.com. Tonight on show 16, I'll be speaking to Swithun Dobson, who was recently a runner-up in our Mises UK essay competition for 2017. He also spoke at our recent Mises UK conference, where he talked about the great British economy. We'll be exploring that topic in a little more depth as we enter these turbulent times of hopefully Britain's great Brexit escape from the evil bureaucratic clutches of the detestable European Union. Good evening, Swithun.
Evening, Andy.
Now, it's great to speak to you. We spoke a little bit at the conference, but before we get going, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, I'm an economics graduate from about 10 years ago, and I'm presently a full-time private tutor. I got out of the state's teaching sector to go independent.
Oh, good man. And what kind of things do you do? Do you just teach one-on-one, or do you teach groups?
I do some small groups, but mainly sort of one-on-one. The biggest group I've got is 3 this year at the moment.
Right. In the early part of your speech, let's get on with business, you said that fiat money inflation, which was made possible by the US coming off the gold standard in 1971, has raised general time preferences in the UK. Can you explain the mechanism of this, and why is this bad for an economy?
Well, the mechanism basically is that any increase in the money supply will reduce the purchasing power of savings, assuming demand for money remains constant. So whereas in the past, you'd have been able to just put, in principle, money under the mattress, and it would have at least maintained its value. Now, if you were to do so, it hemorrhages value. The example I gave, if you put £100 under your mattress in 71, it would have lost 95% of its purchasing power today.
Whoa.
So there just is no point in saving. And so effectively, people's time preference, they go, well, what's the point in saving? We may as well spend now. So I think that's contributed quite heavily to an increase in societal time preference. And the problem with that is the amount of savings which are available for investment declines significantly. And without savings, there's no real resources to be devoted for new ventures, which will increase productivity and general well-being of the economy.
But the Keynesians would say that people spending and consumers driving an economy by spending is better than people hoarding gold coins under the bed like Scrooge McDuck, wouldn't they?
Well, they would, but if society was like the Keynesians, basically humanity probably would have died out, because effectively all they're saying is be blindly optimistic, just keep spending, with no sort of thought for what is the structure of production, what are we actually producing, what is the point of producing. All they care about is, oh no, there's a recession. Oh, that must just mean that there's not enough spending, as opposed to going, well, hang on, surely if we've got a recession, that implies we're not producing the right things. Yeah, hoarding. Yeah, what is hoarding? I mean, saving some money and not spending it, I mean, it's not really a problem if prices are allowed to fall. And absent lots of government regulations, minimum prices, etc., there's no reason why prices wouldn't be able to fall. And if they do, then the Keynesian argument has no weight whatsoever.
Yeah, well, we did see in the Victorian times, didn't we, where we had real gold money and gold coins and so on. Prices dropped constantly from the end of the Napoleonic Wars onwards through to 1914, but we had a massively growing and rising economy. But everything changed, of course, with Mr. Keynes. All of human economics changed. But because of this inflation, people have poured a lot of their savings since 1971 into housing. And that's treated under Keynesianism as an investment, whereas we in the Austrian school would call a house a consumption item because it constantly needs repairing and so on. Now, people put money into houses because the Bank of England can't print houses, so they do appear to rise in value against depreciating fiat money. So another part of your speech was that there might be a bubble in the housing market in the UK. Do you think this is the case? Is this bubble going to burst, and when might this bursting bubble happen in the housing market in the UK?
I'm pretty certain that there's a bubble in the housing market. If you look at the asset value to sort of income ratio, it tends to peak prior to a crash, effectively being that the incomes aren't at a sustainable level to maintain the present level of assets. And I think that's certainly true in the housing market. The average income is, about £26,000 a year. and the average house price is about 220,000, just over. So the amount you have to borrow relative to your income is huge. That's just not going to be sustained, especially if and when the Bank of England decide to raise interest rates again, which will happen at some point. That was likely to happen when the CPI inflation rate gets up significantly higher than it is. It got up to about 5% on the CPI, I think it was in 2011, but they didn't do anything about it. They probably won't do anything about it if it does that now, but if it goes to 6 or above, then they could raise it, and then mortgages become a lot more expensive to finance. Only a small increase can make a significant difference to a monthly repayment. I'd expect significant amounts of defaults, repossessions, and then a collapse in the value.
Now, if you were a betting man, then we have seen a massive amount of quantitative easing to finance the British government's deficits, which have been rising and rising and rising over the last few years. If you're a betting man, when do you think that inflation, price inflation, might go to 6 or 7 or 8%?
That's very hard to say. I did predict it going significantly higher earlier. Actually, when I was at university, I was like, because I was at a similar time with this, I was like, yeah, it's probably going to get to 7 or 8% in a few years, but it didn't. It depends when the banks decide to start lending more and more out to people, as opposed to increasing the reserves, which they have done primarily for a long time, which seems to be starting now. They do seem to be more willing to lend than they had been. Yeah, it definitely could be, say, within 3 years, maybe, although that might be too soon. I've been wrong with this in the past, so it's very hard to say.
Yeah, it's a bit unfair of me, really, because with Austrian economics, we can't really time anything. But I do like to just challenge Austrian economists every now and again, just to see if they will fall into my evil trap there. Now, if we move on, with the Tories under Cameron and May, what we've had in the last 10 years has been basically a blue-coloured socialist party. But we have seen in the newspapers today there is this kind of move between Boris Johnson, Michael Gove and Jacob Rees-Mogg to kind of get together into a triumvirate to get rid of May, which would be great. If that should happen, if May should be booted out of Downing Street, what's the first thing this triumvirate should do to revive the British economy?
The first thing I would tell them to do, which they won't do, is firstly to enact, I believe it was Steve Baker's bill a few years ago, to make it clear to depositors as to whether or not their money is actually being held in the bank as opposed to being lending out, effectively making it clear that whether the bank is running fractional reserves in your bank or not. After that, at least depositors know, people know what's happening with their savings or not. And then I would just say, look, the function of lender of last resort from the Bank of England is going to cease. Effectively wind up the Bank of England and put some proper discipline into the banking sector for the first time since 71. At least then we might get some form of semblance of a sound currency to some extent. Without that, no real progress will be made, because it will be easy for the government to finance any debts and deficits and all discipline. So that would be my first thing to do, which they won't do.
Well, you're probably right there. Now, we do currently have a UK government treasury, which is packed full of ministers who think that the magic money tree at the Bank of England will get them out of all of their deficits. If they do keep printing money to keep financing the UK government debt and all the deficits they're running up, what's going to happen to Britain's finances?
Well, as long as they can get the financial sector to buy the bonds, it will just make ticking over of the government budget more difficult. The problem arises if the financial sector refuses to lend credit, and then the Bank of England will have to buy it directly, which will then signal to the markets that the government is a very bad debtor. When that happens, typically the inflation rate starts rocketing whenever that takes place, be it Zimbabwe, Argentina, or Germany.
Now, a lot of this is psychological, but what do you think would cause the market to stop buying British government bonds?
Probably multiple factors. A debt to GDP ratio, which is sufficiently high, but how high that is, they seem to, or in the case of Japan, have withstood huge levels, and they're still reasonably creditworthy. The debt to GDP, I think, is over 240%, which makes Britain's of about 88 looks tiny in comparison. But a high level of debt to GDP, plus any prolonged stagnation or recessions, which would indicate that the tax revenue is going to dry up, that would probably give them the jitters, because that would give them reason to think that the probability of at least a partial default increases. Those would be the major two, I would say. Obviously, eggs into a war of major sorts, which would be very expensive. Most likely in this case, probably Iran or North Korea at the outside.
Well, let's hope it doesn't come to that. Moving on then, we've done quite a bit of monetary stuff there. Moving on to the fiscal side, let's say we did get a Jacob Rees-Mogg government. The British people have got very used to state schools, state health system, pensioners being looked after by the state welfare system, and all those other things that democracy brings. Now, we've seen a very general reluctance from any political party to stomach any kind of fiscal discipline, and we've seen the rise of Jeremy Corbyn as a result of, as government hasn't been increasing spending as fast as it has in the past. How do you think Jacob Rees-Mogg could bring in a decent fiscal programme without then just being totally destroyed at the next general election by the Marxist Jeremy Corbyn?
I think the focus should primarily be on tax simplification. The complexity of the tax system is astonishing in its length and complexity. If he has a focused sense of simplifying the system, even with maintaining current spendings on all areas, health, education, etc., you still should be able to give some form of tax cuts, basically because you can hopefully sack quite a few bureaucrats, just because the number of people needing to administer the system will significantly decrease. That's where I would suggest the major focus should be, because you can at least pander to the masses, but also at the same time put some genuine savings in there.
Oh, you're a man after my own heart. Sacking bureaucrats and dropping taxes, brilliant. Now, I was thinking that another opportunity for Rees-Mogg might be the opportunity of Brexit, where Britain could become the Singapore of the North. We've got people like Theresa May and her husband and all the other British establishment figures trying to keep us basically inside the appalling European Union. Do you think, as well as tax cuts and sacking bureaucrats, do you think he could make a real Brexit play for him and to help keep the British people on side?
Certainly. The main thing that needs to be hammered to the British people is that the EU is a customs union, and that means we have tariffs on goods imported from outside the EU. And if anybody looks in their house, they will see that most of the stuff that they buy has been produced outside the European Union. You just need to say it's going to get cheaper. I mean, it's an old drum to bang, but the consumer goods that you buy will be cheaper if we can leave the customs union, because we don't have to put any tariffs on it anymore. Now, this gets into a bit of trouble with, say, farmers and other people, but as long as you can keep some of the masses on side, then that's a problem that can be dealt with.
And how can we help somebody like Rees-Mogg bring Brexit in? I mean, just as individuals, what can we do to try to really bring Brexit home and to stop these people like Theresa May from keeping us inside the European Union?
That's difficult. I think the main thing is still just to hammer home what the institution is, because a lot of the Remoaners, I don't think, really understand the organisation they're defending. Also, to point out the appalling behaviour, which has basically treated Britain as some naughty school child who needs disciplining, because he's fed up with the school because it's so bad and decided to leave, and is now sort of trying to dictate terms. So the obvious benefit of, say, whoever we meet to say, the EU makes things more expensive. It's more difficult to make the case with labour regulations to some extent, because a lot of people go, oh no, you're protecting jobs, etc. But to focus on the tariff situation, and just to show with how they've gone about it so far, that they are an incredibly arrogant, bureaucratic organisation. And frankly, why would you want to be a member of a club that treats its members so badly? I think that's the major thing that we can do. And that's just, talking to who we come across, just trying to spread the word on a case-by-case basis.
Now, I've just got one main last question for you. So some young plucky entrepreneur comes to you in one of your one-on-one economics sessions and they say to you, Swithun, I want to start up a business here, or I want to start up a business. Should they stay in the UK, or would you advise them to go and try their luck elsewhere in the world?
I would probably say stay in the UK just on the basis that they probably have better knowledge of the UK, so probably would function better. Although if you want to go for the English-speaking world, a lot of the places are kind of on the way down. But I certainly do know that, say, even in China, I mean, it's a lot easier and quicker to set up a business than it is, say, in California. You know, you can pretty much just start a firm there and then without any permission, pretty much. Yeah, if they want to make serious cash starting from the bottom, then yeah, unfortunately it probably would be better for them to head east.
Well, it's a bit sad that you should say that, but I kind of know what you're thinking. I'm thinking of doing various things like that myself, but maybe if we do get this Brexit and we do get Rees-Mogg in and he can win the next election, maybe we will get a Singapore of the North, so we won't need to go to Singapore. We'll be able to stay in plucky old Britain. Now, is there anything else you'd like our listeners to know, or do you have a website where they could find out how to hire your economic services?
My website is www.reesmogg-tutoring.co.uk, and you can find all my details there to contact me for any of your tutoring needs.
Fantastic. Anyway, great speaking to you tonight, Swithun. Thank you for your time tonight.
Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed tonight's programme on the MisesUK.org podcast. If you'd like to help us out, we'd really appreciate any 5-star ratings or reviews you can do for us on iTunes, or if you can share any of our links on your favourite social media sites. It really does help us out. You can also help us by going to our donate page at MisesUK.org and making a contribution, where I'm sure that our esteemed chairman, Keir Martland, will be more than willing to help you make the world a better place by taking your donation. We'll be back soon with episode 17 of the Mises UK podcast. In the meantime, please look after your property and freedom responsibly.